The terminal moved like a river. Wheels clicking, announcements looping, footsteps stepping to invisible metronomes. A woman stepped forward in that current and looked at first glance like every other passenger. Dark jeans, a worn jacket, a small carry-on that fit neatly by her side. Her stride was unhurried, her face unreadable. Yet there was a practiced calm in the way she scanned for exits. A soft awareness at the edge of her eyes that said she was listening to more than the flight's board. She placed her bag on the conveyor, slid her phone into the plastic tray and handed her boarding pass to the officer at the scanner. A motion so ordinary it was almost forgettable. Her name read Mary Armstrong on the pass. But names can be paper masks. People are not. The officer at the checkpoint was Charles Scott. Heavy-set, square jaw, a badge that sat proud on his chest like a weight he loved to feel. He didn't look at the boarding pass long. He looked at her. That slow, measuring look that confuses authority with dominion. "Step aside," he said, clipped and cold. His tone carried the kind of small cruelty earned by too many years behind a desk and too little accountability. Mary tilted her head, not surprised, only steady. She slid off the line and watched the other passengers shuffle forward. She'd felt that look before, the one that counts skin and makes a verdict. She'd learned not to flinch. Flinching gives them the shape they want to hold. "Where are you headed?" Scott prodded, leaning forward like a man proving a point. "Business?" "Business," she answered evenly, voice low, giving nothing away. He sniffed, a question sharpened into a dare. "You look nervous. You got nothing to hide?" People pretended not to watch, but their curiosity filled the air like static. Whispers curled around the metal detectors. Mary kept her hands loose at her sides, the way trained people keep hands empty so they don't betray intent. When she asked quietly for a female officer to do a pat-down, his face tightened the way old grudges do. He pushed her bag aside with an attitude meant to mark territory, not enforce rules. It was petty. It was personal. It was the kind of small escalation that can become a headline if no one steps in. His smirk was the kind intended to provoke. He spoke a line meant to shrink her in front of everyone, but she didn't shrink. She only met his eyes, calm as steel. If this feels familiar, good, because this first moment is where the world thinks it understands the story. The real story is what happens when the world is wrong. You're listening to Speak Black, where we turn the moments people assume into the moments they never saw coming. If you believe dignity demands a witness, hit like and subscribe now, and open your ears. The female officer's search was brisk, professional. Her hands were firm, but impersonal. A stark contrast to Scott's performative hostility. Mary stood with the stillness of a stone in a stream, her mind already detaching, retreating to a place where pettiness couldn't reach. She let the procedure happen around her, a sequence of motions she had endured in a dozen countries under far more threatening circumstances. This was nothing. A splinter. "You're free to go," the officer said, her voice neutral. Mary collected her bag and phone without a word. She didn't look back at Scott, denying him the satisfaction of a reaction. Her calm was a weapon he didn't know how to wield. She melted back into the river of travelers, the current pulling her toward gate B12. The airport hummed, a great living organism of departures and reunions. A child wailed near a pretzel stand. A flight crew strode past in crisp uniforms, their laughter a bright foreign sound. Mary moved through it all, a ghost in plain sight. Her body ached with a deep, cellular exhaustion, a residue from the damp cold of a Minsk warehouse, and 3 sleepless nights running surveillance on an art smuggling ring that had turned out to be a front for something much darker. The success of that sting, the one her Homeland Security counter-smuggling division team was still writing the classified after-action report on, felt distant now, sanded away by the numbing ritual of commercial flight. Melissa Carter. The alias was a comfortable skin, one of several she slipped into as easily as her jacket. She'd checked in under that name, her movements at the kiosk efficient, her documentation flawless. It was the professionalism of a person for whom detail was the difference between a successful insertion and a body in a ditch. She was a soldier trying to remember the rhythm of civilian life, the part that was supposed to be normal. A flash, unbidden, the glint of a knife in low light, the sour smell of fear, the sharp crack of a radio signal confirming the target was secured. She blinked it away. That was another life, another identity. Here she was just a woman in jeans, trying to get home. But the training never really switched off. It lived in the constant, low-grade scan of her surroundings, the cataloging of faces, the noting of reflections in shop windows. It was this ingrained habit that caught the flicker. A man in a gray hoodie, standing too still by the newsstand, his gaze a tangible weight on her back before it slid away. She didn't turn. She didn't freeze. She simply absorbed the information, the way a forest absorbs a footfall. The feeling was a cold trickle down her spine, a sensation she'd learned, through brutal experience, never to ignore. It was the same feeling she'd had hours before the warehouse raid, a primal whisper that had saved her life. She found a seat near her gate, placing her bag beside her, not at her feet. She pulled out a paperback, a prop as much as a pastime, and let her eyes drift over the words she didn't read. The loudspeaker called a boarding call for Phoenix. The river of people shifted, surged. The man in the gray hoodie was gone. But the feeling remained. It wasn't the petty tyranny of a Charles Scott. This was something else. Something that knew the real Mary Armstrong, the one who lived beneath the paper masks, was finally, dangerously back in the game. The calm was a lie. The storm was already here, and it was watching. Officer Charles Scott watched the river of humanity flow through his checkpoint, and he saw not people, but potential problems. At 38, he had spent 12 years behind the blue lapel of authority, and in that time, he had cultivated a deep, simmering disdain for what he privately called the entitled passenger. The businessmen with their impatient sighs, the vacationers with their sprawling carry-ons, the ones who looked through him as if he were part of the machinery. They all thought they were somebody until they stood in his line. Then, they had to answer to him. His personnel file, had anyone cared to look, contained a string of complaints, a tapestry of bruised feelings and alleged overreach. None had ever stuck. The union was strong, the bureaucracy forgiving, and Charles had learned that a certain kind of bluster, worn like armor, could deflect most consequences. His authority was a fragile egg, and he protected it with the bristling defensiveness of a mother bird. His gaze, heavy and assessing, swept over the queue. It was a dull Tuesday morning, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and anxiety. Then he saw her. She moved differently. It wasn't just the calm, it was the quality of it. While others were buffeted by the chaos, she seemed to move through it, parting it around her like a wake. Dark jeans, a worn jacket, a single bag, She looked like anyone, and yet, to Charles, she looked like no one else. It was in the set of her shoulders, the economy of her motion, the way her eyes cataloged the space without seeming to. It was a confidence that didn't seek approval, a self-containment that felt, to him, like a challenge. It pricked at something deep in his ego. Here was someone who believed she was beyond his dominion. When her documents landed in his hand, the system did him a favor. A soft chime, a yellow flag on the screen. Secondary screening recommended. He didn't know why. Some fragmented data leak, a ghost in the machine from a world far above his pay grade. He didn't need to know. It was all the justification he required. "Step aside," he said, the words clipped and cold, honed by years of wielding small cruelties. She tilted her head, a minute gesture of assessment, not surprise. She slid off the line, her composure an infuriating shield. The other passengers shuffled forward, averted eyes and nervous whispers already beginning to curl through the air like smoke. "Where are you headed?" Charles prodded, leaning into her space, a man proving a point that only he was keeping score of. "Business?" "Business," she answered. Her voice was even, low, a closed door. He sniffed, sharpening the question into a dare. "You look nervous. You got nothing to hide?" He saw the flicker in the eyes of the other travelers, their pretended non-watchfulness. This was the part he sometimes enjoyed, the theater of it, making an example. But she gave him nothing. Her hands hung loose at her sides, empty and still. The way she stood, it was all wrong. She should be fumbling, apologetic, defensive. She was just ready. Then she made her move. "I would like a female officer to perform the pat-down," she said. Her voice quiet but absolute. A statement of fact, not a request. The request, so reasonable, so standard, landed on him like a personal insult. It was a rejection of his authority, a suggestion that his power had limits. His face tightened, the old grudges and minor slights of 1,000 shifts coiling into a single, hot point. He pushed her bag aside with a shove that was meant to mark territory, not enforce rules. It was petty. It was personal. It was the kind of small escalation that needed only a little oxygen to become a fire. His voice rose, aiming to pin her in front of the growing audience. "Is there a problem? The rules are the same for everyone." She didn't shrink. She only met his eyes, her gaze calm as polished steel. The silence from her was louder than his bluster. He could feel the shift in the crowd, the unease. He saw a phone lifted, a red, reharding light glowing like a single accusing eye. The pressure built in his temples. He had to break her composure, shatter this infuriating calm. He needed to see the fear he felt he was owed. The words came out, low and venomous, meant for her alone, but carrying in the sudden hush. "You people," he hissed, the phrase loaded with a lifetime of unexamined prejudice. "Always think the rules don't apply to you." It was the insult before the violence, the verbal slap meant to make her flinch. She didn't. And that was the final, unforgivable provocation. The world narrowed to the space between them. The river of the terminal seemed to slow, the clicking wheels and looping announcements fading into a dull hum. The heat of his own humiliation, the pressure of the watching eyes, the sheer, galling stillness of her. It all became too much. Reason snapped. His hand, thick-fingered and strong, shot out. It wasn't a grab at her arm. It wasn't a push. It was a fundamental violation. His fingers closed around her throat. The contact was shocking. The warmth of her skin, the fragile feel of her windpipe beneath his palm. It was an act of public humiliation, a symbolic abuse of power so raw and immediate that a collective, sharp gasp went through the crowd. For a moment, he felt a jolt of triumphant dominance. Now she would see. Now she would break. Time fractured. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Mary Armstrong's world did not explode into panic. It crystallized into perfect, cold clarity. The dull ache of her overseas mission, the exhaustion, the paper-thin mask of Melissa Carter. It all sloughed away, leaving only the polished core of her training. The feel of his hand on her throat was a trigger, a key turning in a lock deep within her. Her eyes, once unreadable, narrowed. The soft awareness at their edges sharpened into a lethal focus. Every instinct, every hour of drills and real-world application snapped into place. Her body was no longer just a body. It was a weapon that had been unsheathed. Officer Charles Scott had just made the gravest and final miscalculation of his life. He had assumed he was the only one in the confrontation who was dangerous. He was wrong. For a single, suspended second, the entire terminal froze. The river of travelers stopped flowing. Wheels ceased their clicking. The looping announcements from the loudspeaker seemed to fade into a distant, meaningless hum. All that existed was the shocking image of the officer's hand clamped around the woman's throat, and the sea of phone screens, raised like a digital jury, each one glowing with a red recording light. Charles Scott's face was a mask of flushed triumph. He could feel the fragile architecture of her trachea under his palm, the frantic pulse of her carotid artery against his thumb. He leaned in, his voice a guttural mutter meant for her alone, the words dripping with a venomous sense of power. "No one's gonna save you here." He expected a choke, a gag, the desperate scratch of fingernails, the fear he craved to witness. It did not come. Her eyes, which had been unreadable, were now pools of absolute, chilling clarity. There was no panic in them, only a cold, surgical focus that, for the first time, sent a sliver of ice down his own spine. Her voice was quiet, a low counterpoint to his rasp, perfectly audible in the breathless silence. "Funny," she said. "I don't need saving." The world did not explode into a blur of motion. It happened with the sharp, efficient clarity of a sniper's shot. Her left hand came up, not to claw at his wrist, but to trap it. Her fingers locked over his, a steel vice that pinned his offending hand to her neck. At the same instant, her right arm hammered up, the bony edge of her forearm smashing into his elbow joint with a sickening, precise crack. A strangled cry tore from his lips as the nerve-deep agony exploded in his arm. His grip vanished. Before his brain could even register the pain, her body was turning, a fluid pivot that used his own forward momentum against him. Her hip met his torso. Her leg swept his feet, and the 220-pound man was airborne, his sense of dominion replaced by a sudden, weightless terror. He landed on the hard, polished floor with a thunderous impact that shook the ground under the spectators' feet. The air left his lungs in a pained whoosh. He lay there, stunned, cradling his shattered elbow, staring up at the sterile airport lights. The world, a dizzying carousel of shock and pain. A collective, sharp gasp sucked the oxygen from the space, followed by an absolute, ringing silence. Mary Armstrong did not stand over him, breathing heavily. There was no rage on her face, no victory. There was only the same unnerving calm. She adjusted the collar of her jacket with a single, smooth motion, as if brushing off a piece of lint. Then, she reached into the inner pocket of that worn, unassuming jacket. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. She pulled out a slim, black leather wallet. With a flick of her thumb, it snapped open. She didn't hold it up to Scott. She turned slowly, presenting it to the forest of phones, to the dozens of wide, unblinking eyes. The badge caught the light, a burst of polished gold. But it was the credentials beside it that sent the real shockwave through the crowd. Homeland Security, Counter-Smuggling Division. A whisper rippled out, then grew into a wave of stunned exclamations. The story was rewriting itself in real time. The narrative of the aggressive passenger upended and shattered. Her voice cut through the noise, calm, authoritative, and perfectly projected. It was the voice of a debriefing, of a report. It was the voice of absolute control. "This man," she said, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, "just assaulted a federal officer in the middle of a secure zone. Every recording here is evidence." The spell was broken. Chaos, now of a different kind, erupted. Airport security, previously hovering at the edges, now scrambled forward, their faces pale with alarm. A man in a suit, identifying himself as a federal air marshal, was suddenly at her side, nodding grimly as she spoke low, rapid-fire instructions. From the periphery, reporters who seemed to materialize from the very walls surged forward, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. The focus was no longer on the woman on the ground. It was on the man on the floor. Two security officers hauled Charles Scott to his feet. His good arm was wrenched behind his back, and the cold, familiar click of his own handcuffs sealed his fate. He was mumbling, his protests lost in the din, a litany of, "I didn't know," and she. His face was a grotesque canvas of pain, humiliation, and dawning, catastrophic understanding. He had tried to break a woman he saw as beneath him, and in doing so, had shattered his own life. Mary watched for a moment, her expression unreadable. She gave a short, definitive nod to the air marshal, then turned. She picked up her small carry-on, the one that fit so neatly by her side, and slid her badge back into her jacket. And then, she simply walked away. She did not look back. She did not offer a triumphant glance. She adjusted her jacket and merged back into the current of the terminal, a solitary figure leaving the wreckage of a man's arrogance behind her. The river of travelers, after a moment of stunned hesitation, began to flow again, parting around the scene of his humiliation, the moment already being packaged, uploaded, and sent out into the world. The invisible power had revealed itself, not with a roar, but with a quiet, devastating precision. And the world was watching. The secure conference room on the 7th floor of a nondescript federal building in Arlington was a world away from the echoing chaos of the terminal. Here, the air was still and cool, recycled through HEPA filters, smelling of ozone and wiped plastic. The only sound was the low hum of the projector and the voice of Deputy Director Richard Hayes. The footage, as you can imagine, has achieved maximum penetration. Hayes, a man with the weary posture of a retired bloodhound, gestured at the large screen. It showed a mosaic of news channels, each frame a frozen image of Mary's face, Scott's fall, her badge. Every major network, every social media platform. The narrative is complicated. Mary sat perfectly still in the ergonomic leather chair, her hands resting on the polished table. She had changed into a simple black sweater. The physical memory of Scott's grip was a faint, fading bruise, easily ignored. The storm of public opinion was a distant weather system. Complicated is manageable, she said, her voice even. The facts are on our side. He assaulted a federal agent. The response was proportionate. The optics, Mary, Hayes countered, rubbing a hand over his tired face, are a goddamn minefield. Half the country sees a hero. The other half sees an over-militarized government agent taking down a blue-collar officer. The agency's position is containment. We issue a statement. You go on temporary administrative leave pending a full review, and we let this blow over. It was the expected play. The safe play. Bureaucracy's first instinct was always to cauterize, but something nagged at her, a loose thread in the perfectly woven tapestry of the incident. The calm she had exhibited in the terminal was now a focused, analytical quiet. Sir, with respect, something doesn't add up. She leaned forward, tapping a key on the laptop before her. The screen changed to display her own travel manifest. My alias, Melissa Carter, was flagged for secondary screening. Why? Hayes shrugged. A glitch. A data cross-contamination from your Minscop. It happens. It happens, she echoed, but her tone was skeptical. But the timing is exceptional. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up digital security logs with an access level that made Hayes's eyebrows twitch upward. The flag on Melissa Carter wasn't generated by a legacy system ghost. It was a manual entry, initiated from within the DHS network. 37 minutes before I reached the checkpoint. The air in the room tightened. A glitch was an accident. A manual entry was intent. Hayes was silent now, watching her work. This was where Mary Armstrong, the soldier, transitioned into Mary Armstrong, the hunter. She cross-referenced the access log with personnel databases, her movements swift and sure. The thread she pulled began to unravel a much larger tapestry. The internal user who had flagged her alias had their access privileges routed through a server cluster used for low-priority administrative tasks. But a deeper dig into that server's activity revealed a series of encrypted data transfers. The destination wasn't a DHS terminal. It was a blind IP that, after several layers of peeling back, resolved to a data hosting service known for lax oversight. And the data transferred wasn't just about her. Look at this, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She pulled up a file list from the transfer. Among the mundane data packets was a file named SeaTac Logistics Personnel Review.pdf, the SeaTac Airport Employee List. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. She opened the file. It was a roster of janitorial, baggage handling, and security staff. And there, highlighted in the data, was Charles Scott. His record was clean, but his bank records, which she accessed with a swift, legally gray intrusion, told a different story. 3 deposits over the last 2 months. Substantial, unexplained, wired from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, a financial entity she had last seen in the Byzantine money trail of the Minsk art smuggling ring. The realization did not arrive with a gasp, but with a chilling, absolute silence. It settled over the room like a fine dust. Scott wasn't just a racist with a badge and a fragile ego. He was a plant, a paid asset. The random stop was never random. It was a calculated move. Her undercover identity had been burned, leaked from within their own system to the very network she had been trying to dismantle. They couldn't touch her in the shadows, so they had arranged a public death. Not a physical one, though his grip on her throat suggested he wouldn't have minded that outcome, but a professional, legal, and social one. They had used the predictable weapon of his prejudice as the trigger, setting her up to be just another aggressive passenger subdued by security, her credibility destroyed, her investigation collapsing in the ensuing scandal. A perfect, deniable assassination of her career. Hayes finally spoke, his voice gravelly. They tried to bury you with a headline. Mary didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, on the lines of code and financial transactions that connected a petty tyrant at an airport to a sophisticated international syndicate. The enemy wasn't just out there. The leak meant the enemy was in here. Someone with access, with knowledge, had handed her over. The social drama was over. The action thriller had begun. She stood up, the chair rolling back silently. Containment is no longer an option, sir. They know I'm on to them. They've shown their hand. What are you proposing? Hayes asked, though from the look in his eyes he already knew. Administrative leave, publicly. Let them think they've won. Let them think I'm sidelined. She closed the laptop with a definitive snap. I'm going to find the source of that leak, and I'm going to finish this. Mary, without agency backing, you'll be exposed. You have no official status, no backup. She met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw the same cold, polished steel that had looked into Charles Scott's soul. Melissa Carter is blown, she said, heading for the door. It's time to be someone else. This is off the record. She left him in the silent, sterile room, the ghost of her determination hanging in the air. The woman who had learned to act invisible was about to disappear completely, not to hide, but to hunt. The real conflict had just begun. The air in the airport's lower service corridor was different. It was heavy with the smell of diesel fumes, stale coffee, and the faint, metallic tang of anxiety. The polished floors of the main terminal were a distant memory, replaced by scuffed linoleum and concrete stained with years of tire tracks. Here, the river of travelers was a myth. This was the plumbing. Mary Armstrong moved through it as Lena Petrova, a name on a forged work order, a face behind safety glasses and a cap pulled low. Her cover was a subcontractor for a HVAC firm running a diagnostic sweep of the cargo bay ventilation systems. The uniform, ill-fitting navy blue coveralls, a tool belt heavy with legitimate equipment, was a better disguise than any cocktail dress or business suit. It made her invisible to the world that mattered above. Down here, she was part of the scenery, a piece of the machinery. Her ID badge, a masterpiece of digital forgery, chirped compliantly at each secure door. In her toolbox, nestled beside a thermal imager and a spectrum analyzer, were more specialized tools. Micro cameras no larger than a pinhead, their lenses like drops of black oil, and audio pickups sensitive enough to capture a whisper from 30 feet. Her work was slow, methodical. She would pause for long minutes at a junction box, seemingly checking wiring, while her fingers deftly placed a camera with a view of Bay 7's primary loading door. She adjusted a vent, her movements clumsy and deliberate like a tired technician, and left a listening device nestled in the ductwork overlooking a cluster of brake tables where the ground crew gathered. The data streamed to an encrypted receiver in her van, parked in the long-term lot. Patterns began to emerge, not in the shouted orders or the forklift traffic, but in the silences, the furtive glances, The way certain cargo containers, always unmarked, always handled by a specific crew, were isolated from the main flow. She tracked the manifests. The contents were listed as machine parts, medical supplies, agricultural equipment. But the weight distributions were wrong. The shipping routes were illogical, zigzagging through free trade zones with no economic sense. This wasn't about moving drugs or cash. This was about moving something that required a different kind of camouflage. High value, low volume. The kind of thing that could be hidden in plain sight. Late that night, long after the shift change, the cargo bay was a cathedral of shadows and echoes. The great metal doors were shut, the only light coming from the pale glow of emergency exits and the single lamp she'd set up for her maintenance. The air was cold, smelling of cold metal and packed dirt. It was in Bay 11, tucked behind a stack of pallets destined for Singapore, that she found it. A crate, its seals fresh, but its labeling sloppy. A mismatch. Using a pry bar from her belt, she worked a corner loose with a soft, splintering crack that seemed deafening in the silence. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were not machine parts. They were sleek, matte black casings, etched with serial numbers she recognized from an Interpol bulletin. Next generation thermal scopes, military grade, the kind that could turn a sniper into a ghost. Beside them, wrapped in static-free material, were delicate circuit boards, not for any commercial device. These were guidance system components for tactical drones. The Minsk operation had been about art as a value transfer mechanism. This was different. This was about arming someone. This was escalation. A shadow moved. It was a shift in the darkness at the far end of the bay, a deeper black detaching itself from the wall. Her body reacted before her mind fully registered the threat. She didn't startle. She didn't freeze. She simply melted backward, sliding into the narrow gap between two towering stacks of cargo containers, her tool bag pulled tight against her chest. She became a part of the landscape, her breathing shallow, her heartbeat a controlled, steady drum in her ears. Two men walked into the pool of light she had just vacated. They weren't in uniform. They wore dark, casual clothes, their postures coiled, their eyes scanning the shadows. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, knelt by the crate she had just opened. He ran a hand over the broken seal, his head cocked. "He's right. Someone's been down here," he muttered, his voice a low rumble. The other, shorter and stockier, clicked on a flashlight, its beam cutting a swath through the darkness. It swept past Mary's hiding place, inches from her face. She didn't blink. "Scott's been whining from lockup," the stocky one said, his voice laced with contempt. "Sending messages through his lawyer. Says she's not the type to quit. Says she's still digging." The tall man stood up, dusting off his hands. "He was a useful idiot, but he's not wrong. We can't let her find the shipment. It's all here, ready to move. One more loose end to tie up." "Where is she?" "Hayes put her on leave. She's in the wind, but she'll come back here. They always come back to the scene." The tall man's voice was cold, analytical. "We just have to be ready. Make it look like an accident this time. A fall down a service shaft. Electrocution. Something clean." The beam of the flashlight swept again, then clicked off. "Let's go. We've got a plane to unload in 40. Their footsteps receded, fading into the hum of the airport's vast machinery. Mary remained in the darkness, the cold from the concrete floor seeping through her coveralls. The pieces clicked into place with the finality of a lock. The network knew she was alive. They knew she was a threat. Scott, from his cell, was still a part of this. A canary in a coal mine trying to sing for his life. The random check had been their first move. This was their second. They were no longer trying to discredit her. They were planning a hit. She was in ground zero, and the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The hunt was now a duel. Charles Scott's return to the airport was not a reinstatement. It was a ghost's pilgrimage. His suspension was a purgatory. His name a curse in the news cycles and a joke in the break rooms. The weight of the badge was gone from his chest, replaced by a heavier, hotter weight. Humiliation and the desperate, clawing need to erase it. The smugglers had found him easily. They spoke in calm, reasonable tones, their promises delivered through a burner phone. They could make the charges disappear. They could give him his life back, his authority, his pride. All he had to do was one final job. A sanitation. The woman, Armstrong, was a rabid dog that needed to be put down. She was digging, and she was getting close. They needed a man on the inside, someone who knew the blind spots, someone with nothing left to lose. He was that man. And so, he moved through the familiar corridors, not as an officer, but as a weapon. His fury was a constant, low-grade fever. The memory of her calm face, the shocking, precise violence of her takedown, played on a loop in his mind. She hadn't just beaten him. She had unmade him. And for that, she had to be unmade in return. He found her in Hangar 4, a cavernous space reserved for private charters and long-term storage. It was a kingdom of shadows and silence, far from the river of people. She was there, disguised as a maintenance worker, her back to him as she examined a crate marked aeronautical spares. She looked small in the vastness, insignificant, a mouse in a maze he had designed. He didn't announce himself. He simply stepped from behind a stack of aluminum containers, the metal door sighing shut behind him, sealing them in. "Looking for something, Agent?" Mary didn't jump. She finished making a note on a digital pad, her movements unhurried before she turned. Her eyes in the gloom held no surprise, only a weary recognition, as if he were a bill she had long expected to come due. "Scott," she said. Her voice was flat. "I heard you were out. I'm surprised they let you back on the premises." "They didn't let me do anything," he snarled, taking a step forward. His hands were clenched at his sides. "This is my house. You just walked into it." The hangar air was cold, smelling of jet fuel and dust. A single safety light high above cast long, distorted shadows, turning the parked forklifts and crates into monolithic sculptures. "You think you humiliated me?" he continued, his voice rising, echoing in the emptiness. "You think that little show in the terminal was a victory? You just started a war you can't win. You and your badge. You're nothing down here." Mary watched him, her posture relaxed but ready. She saw the wildness in his eyes, the tremor in his hands. This wasn't the calculated cruelty of a man with authority. This was the raw, desperate violence of a cornered animal. "No," she replied, her tone chillingly calm. "I didn't start a war, Scott. I just showed the world who you really were. A bully, a bigot, and now it seems a hired thug." The word thug hit him like a physical blow. A guttural sound ripped from his throat. The pretense of conversation was over. He lunged. The fight was not like the first one. There was no audience, no rules, No veneer of procedure. It was raw and ugly. He came at her with the brute force of his rage, swinging a heavy fist meant to cave in her skull. Mary didn't meet force with force. She flowed around it. She sidestepped, his momentum carrying him past her. He crashed into a metal shelving unit, sending tools clattering to the concrete floor. He roared, grabbing a long steel pry bar from the mess. He advanced again, swinging the bar in a wide, whistling arc. Mary ducked under it, the metal humming inches from her head. She moved backward, leading him deeper into the forest of crates and machinery. This was her terrain now. Close quarters. Uneven. He was stronger, fueled by hate. But she was precision. She was efficiency. He swung the bar again, a vicious overhead chop. This time, she didn't retreat. She stepped inside the arc, her left forearm blocking his wrist, stopping the blow dead. The impact jarred up her arm, but she absorbed it. Her right hand, fingers stiffened into a blade, struck the soft nerve cluster under his armpit. His arm went numb. The pry bar clattered to the floor. A cry of pain and shock escaped him. He tried to grapple, to use his weight to crush her against a crate. She pivoted, using his own bulk, and slammed his face into the sharp corner of a shipping container. He staggered back, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, blurring his vision. He was panting now, his breath pluming in the cold air. The certainty of his victory was crumbling, replaced by the cold dread of a repeating nightmare. She was doing it again. She was making him look like a fool. He made one last, desperate charge, fumbling for something in his waistband. He never got to clear it. In the time it took him to take 2 steps, Mary's posture changed. The defensive flow was gone, replaced by a predator's stillness. Her hand went to the small of her back and came up holding a compact, black semi-automatic pistol. The motion was one seamless, practiced hole. She didn't aim. She presented. The barrel was a steady, unblinking eye, leveled at the center of his mass. Scott froze. His own hand, halfway to the grip of a stolen security guard's pistol, stopped as if seized by ice. The world shrank to the dark circle of the muzzle. All his rage, his desperation, drained away, leaving only the primal, piss fear of a man staring at his own death. He saw no anger in her eyes, no triumph, just the same unnerving calm. The calm of a professional who had already calculated the outcome. The hangar was silent again, save for the ragged sound of his breathing and the drip of his blood on the concrete. The hunter had returned, and this time she had brought a gun. The gun was a period at the end of a short, violent sentence. Charles Scott, disarmed and broken, sat handcuffed to the strut of a forklift, his head bowed, blood dripping a slow, steady rhythm onto the oil-stained concrete. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the hollowed-out silence of total defeat. Mary didn't waste a moment. She retrieved the stolen security pistol from his waistband, cleared it, and tucked it into her tool bag. More importantly, she found his phone, a cheap, untraceable burner, in his jacket pocket. It was warm, almost pulsing with latent betrayal. She left him there in the shadows of Hangar 4, a piece of discarded machinery. He was no longer the antagonist. He was evidence. Her real work was just beginning. Back in the sterile silence of her van, the hum of the airport's perimeter fence a distant white noise, she plugged the burner phone into a ruggedized laptop. The encryption was good, but not good enough against the agency-grade decryption software she wasn't supposed to have. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, a digital lock being picked one pin at a time. The messages that unfolded were not the crude threats of thugs. They were terse, professional. Logistics, timetables, bank routing numbers, and names. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't just low-level baggage handlers and a corrupted security guard. The threads wove upwards into the administrative stratosphere. There was a vice president of cargo operations, his digital signature authorizing the expedited, no-scan clearance for specific containers. A shift supervisor for the TSA, his messages confirming the all-clear on pre-selected flights. A captain in the airport police, his role to reroutine patrols away from active loading zones during specific windows. This was a conspiracy with a corporate flowchart. A sophisticated cancer that had metastasized deep into the airport's vital organs. They weren't just moving stolen tech. They were using the entire legitimate apparatus of global transit to do it. The weaponized scopes and drone components were just one shipment in a much larger, longer-running operation. Her eyes fixed on the latest string of messages. The final, largest shipment was moving tonight. Cargo Flight 881, a converted 747 freighter bound for a private airstrip in a country with no extradition treaty. The all-clear had been given. The sanitation problem, was supposed to have been handled by Scott. They thought the coast was clear. She cross-referenced the flight plan with the live airport database. Flight 881 was being loaded at Bay 17. She had less than an hour. Grabbing a device the size and shape of a thick magnet, she slipped out of the van and back into the river of the night shift. Her cover was thinning, but it had to hold for a few more minutes. Bay 17 was a hive of activity under the harsh glare of floodlights. The massive gape of the 747's nose cone was open, swallowing containers. Moving with the harried purpose of a ground chief, she weaved through the tangle of fuel trucks and baggage trains. She didn't look at the workers. To look was to be seen. Her target was the forward landing gear assembly, a complex tangle of hydraulics and metal shrouding, close to the cargo hold. As a forklift beeped its reverse warning, she dropped to a knee, pretending to tie her boot. Her hand darted out, slapping the magnetic tracker high up inside the gear housing. It clicked into place, invisible. She was up and moving again, melting back into the darkness before anyone could question her presence. Back in the van, the tracker's signal appeared on her screen, a steady, blinking green dot tethered to the icon of Flight 881. It was done. The bird was tagged. She opened a secure, encrypted channel to Deputy Director Hayes. His face appeared on the screen, etched with deeper lines than she remembered. "Armstrong," he said, his voice tight. "Your status?" "The local PD just found Scott cuffed in a hangar. He's singing a very interesting song." "The song is much bigger than Scott, sir." She transmitted the data dump from the burner phone. The names, the messages, the financial trails. The corruption goes to the executive level. Flight 881, departing in 40 minutes, is carrying the crown jewels. I've placed a tracker. Hayes scanned the data, his face growing pale. Jesus Christ. He looked up, his expression grim. This is a massive, multi-agency operation now. You've done your part, Mary. Stand down. Evacuate the area. A joint task force is being assembled as we speak. There's no time for a task force, she said, her voice calm but absolute. By the time they get their briefing packets, that plane will be in international airspace. The evidence will be gone. The network will scatter. That is not your call to make, Hayes's voice sharpened, the sound of a man trying to reassert control over a situation that was already gone. You are not authorized to act alone. You are on unofficial leave. If you engage, you have zero backup, zero legitimacy. You will be a rogue agent, and I will not be able to protect you. She held his gaze through the screen. The weight of his words was real. She would be disavowed. If she was killed, she was a tragic, reckless former agent. If she succeeded, she might still face a tribunal. But she thought of the thermal scopes that would make soldiers invisible in the night, the drone components that could guide death from the sky. She thought of the smugglers, sitting in their offices and wearing their badges, poisoning the system from within. "They tried to bury me with a headline, sir," she said, her voice quiet but ironclad. "Then they sent a man to kill me. They don't get to just fly away." Hayes stared at her, a complex war of duty, fear, and a shred of admiration in his eyes. He knew the order was right. He also knew she was right. "Mary," it was a warning, and a farewell. "I'll be in touch," she said, and terminated the link. The screen went dark. The van was silent. Outside, the airport hummed, oblivious. She was utterly, completely alone. No badge, no backup. Just a woman, a stolen gun, and a blinking green dot on a screen. She looked at the flight plan one last time. The 747 would taxi to runway 16R. It needed a long, slow roll to get its massive weight airborne. She didn't need to shoot it down. She just needed to stop it from ever leaving the ground. One woman against an entire operation. She started the van. The night on the tarmac was a different kind of wilderness. A vast, flat plain of painted asphalt, lit by the cold blue of runway lights, and washed in the hot, roaring breath of jet engines. The air trembled, thick with the smell of burnt fuel and impending rain. In the distance, the hulking silhouette of the 747 freighter began its slow, majestic crawl toward the runway, a beast being led to its launch. Mary moved through this industrial savanna like a shadow, her dark coveralls blending into the gloom. She had ditched the van for a silent electric baggage tug, its small headlight off, weaving between parked ground equipment. The blinking green dot on her GPS was her lodestar. The plane was her prey. She reached the staging area just as the final fuel truck disconnected. The ground crew was small, efficient. 4 men, their faces hard in the ambient light. These weren't baggage handlers. They were enforcers, armed with compact submachine guns slung over their shoulders, their postures alert. The presence of heavy weapons confirmed it. This was the shipment. There was no time for stealth, only for shock. She gunned the tug, aiming it not at the men, but at the complex web of cables and hoses connecting the plane to the ground power unit. The small vehicle slammed into the unit with a shriek of tearing metal and a shower of white sparks. The floodlights on that side of the plane flickered and died, plunging the area into sudden, chaotic darkness. She was already moving, rolling off the tug before it hit, the stolen pistol in her hand. The gunfight erupted not with a bang, but with a staccato scream. Muzzle flashes tore orange wounds in the darkness. Bullets whined off the tug's frame and sparked against the asphalt around her. She didn't fire wildly. She was a sculptor, and noise was her clay. A single shot took out the knee of the nearest gunman. His scream was a better weapon than a bullet, fracturing the other's focus. A second shot punched into the engine block of a nearby fuel truck, a warning, Not an invitation to explode, but enough to make two others dive for cover. She moved in a low, fluid crouch, using the colossal landing gear for cover. The roar of the plane's auxiliary power unit was a deafening blanket, swallowing the sounds of the fight. She was a ghost in the machine, striking and fading. Then, a new shape lurched from behind a stack of cargo pallets. Charles Scott. He was a mess. His forehead was a crusted mask of blood from their hangar fight. One arm hung useless at his side, but in his good hand he held his service pistol, his eyes burning with a feverish, final hatred. "Armstrong," he bellowed, his voice raw, firing two wild shots that ricocheted off the tire beside her head. He was a complication, a spanner in the works of her precise operation. She couldn't ignore him. The remaining smugglers, seeing the distraction, tried to flank her. She was pinned between the advancing professionals and the vengeful madman. Scott closed in, ignoring the crossfire. His world narrowed to her. "It ends now. You hear me? It ends." He was 10 feet away, raising his pistol, a triumphant snarl on his lips. Mary didn't have a clean shot, so she changed the battlefield. She fired twice at the hydraulic line servicing the cargo loader adjacent to Scott. A high-pressed stream of fluid hissed out, spraying into the air. She put her next round into the loader's control panel. With a groan of dying machinery, the loader's arm sagged, then collapsed, its metal claw swinging down like a giant's fist. It didn't hit Scott, but it crashed onto the pallet next to him, sending a cascade of heavy crates tumbling. One caught him in the back, sending him sprawling, his pistol skittering across the asphalt. He tried to push himself up, dazed, just as Mary closed the distance. He saw her coming and made a last, desperate lunge for her gun hand. His bloody fingers closed around her wrist. His strength, even wounded, immense. For a second, they were locked, a frozen tableau of their entire conflict. His face was a grotesque mask of pain and fury. Hers was calm, resolved. "You lose," he spat, spittle flecking his lips. "No," she said. "You just never learned." Her body became a lever. She didn't pull back. She stepped in, using his own grip as a pivot, and executed a perfect, brutal hip throw. He sailed over her hip, his bulk seeming weightless for a moment before he crashed onto the asphalt on his back, all the air leaving his body in a sickening gasp. Before he could even process the impact, she was on him. She wrenched his good arm back, slapped a set of her own cuffs on his wrist, and clicked the other end through the heavy handle of a nearby crate. The crate was marked in bold red letters. Fragile. He was anchored, beaten, finished. The fight seemed to go out of the remaining smugglers at the sight of their last, desperate ally being so definitively neutralized. Their fire became sporadic, panicked. That was when the new sound cut through the night, the wail of sirens, growing rapidly closer. A convoy of black SUVs and police cruisers, lights flashing, sped onto the tarmac, surrounding the area. Federal agents in body armor poured out, weapons raised. The takedown was swift and anticlimactic. The smugglers, outnumbered and outgunned, dropped their weapons. In the sudden ringing silence, broken only by the idling whine of the 747 and the frantic sirens, Mary stood up. She holstered her pistol, her breath a faint plume in the cold air. She looked down at Scott, who lay shackled to the fragile crate, his body broken, his spirit extinguished. A young baggage handler, who had been recording the entire firefight from the relative safety of a service tunnel, zoomed in on her face. The camera, steady despite the chaos, captured the scene in high definition. Mary adjusted her jacket, met the camera's lens for a fleeting moment, and then looked back at Scott, her voice clear and calm, carrying the weight of a final verdict. "Looks like the wrong person got stopped today." She turned and walked away, past the stunned federal agents, past the flashing lights, a solitary figure moving through the aftermath of the storm she had created. The river of the airport was dammed, the poison flushed out, the invisible power had become visible, and in its wake, it left only the stark, satisfying light of justice. Dawn broke over the city, not with a bang, but with a quiet, digital hum. The storm of the previous night had cleared, leaving a clean, washed sky, but the airwaves were saturated. Headlines scrolled across news tickers and blossomed on social media feeds, a torrent of ink and pixels trying to capture what had happened on the tarmac. Federal agent uncovers vast airport corruption ring. Tarmac takedown, the woman who fought back. From random check to RICO, the fall of a smuggling empire. The grainy, chaotic footage from the baggage handler's phone was everywhere. It was spliced and analyzed, slowed down and zoomed in on. The world watched the flash of gunfire, the collapse of the cargo loader, the precise, brutal efficiency of the takedown. They watched Mary Armstrong, a steady figure in the chaos, and they heard her final, quiet line delivered to the man cuffed to the fragile crate. It was a line that echoed in living rooms and coffee shops, a perfect, poetic coda to a story of injustice flipped on its head. She had become a symbol, not just of a federal agent doing her job, but of dignity under pressure, of courage that answered cruelty with unyielding precision. For some, she was a hero. For others, a warning. For a great many, she was a reflection of a fight they knew all too well. Mary saw none of it. She stood in the quiet of her own apartment, a space of sparse furniture and neutral colors. The silence was a physical relief after the roar of jets and gunfire. The morning light streamed through the blinds, painting sharp lines across the wooden floor. On a simple bookshelf, between a few well-worn novels and legal texts, stood a small framed photograph. It showed a man with kind, tired eyes and a determined set to his jaw, his arm around a young Mary on her graduation day. Her father, a civil rights lawyer who had spent his life fighting smart, losing battles with grace and winning them with quiet, unassailable truth. She unpinned the Homeland Security badge from her belt. The gold seal caught the morning light, gleaming for a moment. It felt heavy, not with the weight of authority, but with the weight of the journey. She placed it gently on the shelf, right beside the photograph. Her voice was a soft whisper in the stillness, meant only for him. "You told me to fight smart." A faint, weary smile touched her lips. "I finally did." It was the end of a chapter. The corruption ring was in custody. The headlines were written. The public had its verdict. Charles Scott was facing a litany of federal charges, his life a cautionary tale. The executives and officers whose names she had uncovered were being perp-walked into courthouses. The system, shocked into action, was now grinding through the motions of justice. There was a peace in it, a resolution, but not an end. As if on cue, her personal phone, a sleek, encrypted device, buzzed once on the kitchen counter. A single, discreet vibration. No ringtone, no flashy alert, just a pulse of light. She walked over and picked it up. The screen glowed with a brief, text-only message from a blocked number. New brief ready. Asset recovery. Lisbon. Acknowledge if operational. She looked from the phone to the photograph, from the future to the past. The badge on the shelf was a testament to one fight finished. The message on the phone was the summons to the next. The world was full of Charles Scotts, of hidden networks, of injustices waiting for a witness. Justice didn't rest. And neither did she. A faint smile, this one touched with a hint of resolve, settled on her face. Her thumb hovered over the keypad for only a second before she typed a single character. She placed the phone back down. The woman who had learned to be invisible was already gone, her reflection in the dark screen shifting, preparing to become someone new. The river was always moving, and she was ready to step back into the current.